Welcome back to this week's PBSC Magna Carta, featuring another special collab event with the Undergraduate Mock Trial Association at the University of Windsor.
Magna Carta is a show run by the Pro Bono Students of Canada, the Windsor chapter at the University of Windsor's Faculty of Law. PBSC is on a mission to provide free legal support to people and communities facing barriers to justice. With 22 chapters throughout Canada, we are the largest pro bono organization in the country. Our goal with this program is to provide you with all accessible information about relevant legal issues affecting our community.
The Undergraduate Mock Trial Association is dedicated to fostering a passion for law, advocacy, and critical thinking among undergraduate students at the University of Windsor.
Through competitive mock trials, both in-house and outside of Windsor, mentorship, and experiential learning, we aim to develop students' legal knowledge, communication skills, critical thinking, and ethical leadership.
Our mission is to provide a platform that empowers students to engage with the law, build confidence in public speaking, and prepare for future careers in law and related fields.
Before we begin, I'm your co-host, Clara Blionge, a 1L dual JD student. This is my first time working with PBSC, and I'm very excited to work with my peers in increasing access to justice for people in the Windsor community.
And I'm your co-host, Sofia Zadorojna, a 1L dual JD student at the University of Windsor and Detroit Mercy. This year, I'm excited to work with the PBSC to support our community and the people of Windsor.
And I'm your co-host, Natalia Cervenkovsky, a third-year undergraduate philosophy student. I am this year's Undergraduate Mock Trial Association president, and am excited to partner with PBSC and CJAM as a future law student with a passion for promoting accessibility to justice.
And I'm your co-host, Gabriella Mayo, a third-year communications student. I'm this year's Vice President of Events and Coordination for the Undergraduate Mock Trial Association, and I'm super excited to be working with PBSC and CJAM. I'm very passionate about the law and always looking for opportunities to advocate for social justice and equality.
Today, we are going to have a diplomatic discussion and debate on whether Canada should leave NATO or remain a member. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and was established in 1949 by 12 countries: the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European nations, including the United Kingdom, France, and Italy. The organization was formed in response to the Soviet Union's growing influence in Eastern Europe after World War II. The goal was to create a collective defense arrangement where an attack against one member would be considered an attack against all, as outlined in Article 5 of the NATO Treaty today. NATO has 32 member countries, which are sometimes divided on how to approach certain issues, such as defense spending and responses to global crisis. Your co-host, Sophia, and I will be arguing for Canada to leave NATO, while your other co-hosts, Gabby and Natalia, will be arguing for Canada to stay. And with that, we begin the debate.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are here to present a compelling case for why Canada should remain a member of NATO. As a cornerstone of Canada's foreign policy, NATO membership aligns closely with our country's interests, reinforces our security, and significantly strengthens our voice on the global stage. In our view, staying in NATO is essential for Canada's future, and we will support this position with 3 key arguments. First, we will demonstrate how Canada's membership in NATO enhances our country's ability to advocate for nuclear disarmament, positioning us as a leader in global peace efforts. Second, we will illustrate the crucial security guarantees and financial benefits that Canada gains through NATO's system of collective defense, which helps us meet our defense needs in a cost-effective way. And lastly, we will show that NATO's adaptation to modern threats, such as cyber attacks and global terrorism, ensures that it remains a relevant and valuable alliance for Canada, even in the post-Cold War world. Overall, we believe that Canada's ongoing commitment to NATO is not only a wise decision, but a necessary one for our national security, economic well-being, and global influence. Thank you, and let's dive into our arguments.
Our first argument focuses on how Canada's membership in NATO to be a strong advocate for nuclear disarmament. It's true that NATO has a policy of nuclear deterrence, but Canada's participation in the alliance allows us to influence these policies to align with our commitment to global nuclear disarmament. Canada has been a leader in disarmament, helping to establish the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in 1968 and advocating for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. However, leaving NATO would mean losing a huge platform where Canada can continue to push for these goals. From within NATO, Canada has already taken steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons within NATO. In the 1990s, Canada played a large role in advocating for reducing NATO's dependence on nuclear weapons, influencing them to take a more cautious approach. Canada has always voiced the need for dialogue on disarmament and prioritizes diplomacy over military escalation, even within NATO. By staying a member, Canada keeps their valuable seat at the table, where it can work with other countries to fight for disarmament. If Canada were to leave NATO, it would lose direct influence over its policies, including its nuclear stance. Canada's membership allows it to build coalitions within NATO to advocate for change and reduce its reliance on nuclear deterrence. Leaving NATO would isolate Canada from important diplomatic conversations, making it more challenging to have a strong voice for disarmament in a global context. Other nations might question why Canada left, instead of staying to push for reform, potentially diminishing our reputation as a leader in nuclear disarmament. Also, leaving NATO would not stop the reality of nuclear deterrence. It would only remove Canada from the conversation. By staying in NATO, Canada can push for disarmament while benefiting from the security umbrella that protects its citizens. This takes into account the complexities of the modern world while still staying true to Canada's values. Canada's ability to negotiate, influence, and fight for disarmament within NATO has been an essential part of its foreign policy. Walking away would diminish our diplomatic leverage, making it harder to influence allies and opponents in important negotiations, including those held at the United Nations and more. To conclude, Canada's role in NATO strengthens, not weakens, its position as a leader in the global movement for nuclear disarmament.
Hello, audience. Today, we stand firmly in favor of the resolution that Canada should leave NATO. Canada's continued membership in NATO not only clashes with its core values and foreign policy goals, particularly in nuclear disarmament, but also burdens the nation with unnecessary financial obligations. NATO has evolved from its original Cold War mission into an alliance that has expanded far beyond its initial purpose, and, as such, Canada's involvement is increasingly misaligned with its interests. We will support this stance with three main arguments. First, remaining in NATO directly contradicts Canada's nuclear disarmament policy and commitment to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. Second, NATO's military spending requirements create an undue financial burden on Canada. And finally, NATO's continued existence and expansion after the Cold War have made it more of an instrument for the interests of a few powerful nations, rather than a force for collective security.
Our first argument centers on NATO's conflict with Canada's stance on nuclear disarmament. Canada has a long history of advocating for nuclear disarmament and has championed initiatives to limit and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons globally. As a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, Canada has pledged to work towards a world free from nuclear weapons. aligning itself with a majority of UN member states in seeking disarmament. Canada's stance on nuclear disarmament reflects a broader vision of peace and international cooperation, which it has supported through diplomatic means and multilateral agreements. By standing with non-nuclear states in opposing nuclear proliferation, Canada gains credibility as a country committed to reducing global threats and promoting peace. This credibility is crucial in gaining support from the international community on nuclear issues. Furthermore, Canada has endorsed international agreements like the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, and regularly participates in disarmament conferences, making nuclear disarmament a significant component of its foreign policy identity. In contrast, NATO's security framework includes a nuclear deterrence strategy, which it deems necessary for protecting member states and deterring potential nuclear threats. The alliance maintains a policy of nuclear sharing, whereby U.S. nuclear weapons are stationed in Europe and remain under NATO's control in the event of a crisis. This arrangement reflects NATO's commitment to retaining nuclear capabilities as a core part of its defense policy, a policy that NATO's strategic documents reinforce and that has been a pillar of its security strategy since the Cold War. For Canada, this arrangement poses a fundamental problem. NATO's stance on nuclear deterrence runs counter to Canada's stated goal of achieving a nuclear-free world. By remaining in an alliance that actively relies on nuclear arms, Canada appears to endorse a system that perpetuates nuclear weapons rather than eliminating them. This not only undermines its disarmament commitments, but also puts Canada in a position where its actions do not align with its words on nuclear disarmament. Canada's involvement in NATO's nuclear strategy creates a perception of hypocrisy that complicates its diplomatic relationships. Many nations, particularly in the global south, already perceive nuclear-armed alliances as instruments of Western power projection rather than genuine collective security organizations. Canada's position in NATO can reinforce these perceptions, making it harder for Canada to present itself as a neutral and honest broker in disarmament discussions. For instance, as Canada encourages other nations to move away from nuclear weapons, those nations may question why Canada continues to support an alliance that integrates nuclear deterrence so centrally into its security strategy. Such perceptions may impact Canada's ability to foster support for disarmament measures at forums like the United Nations or NPT review conferences. Canada's attempts to play a leading role in disarmament could be perceived as insincere if it continues to operate within a military alliance so explicitly tied to nuclear strategies. Consequently, Canada's NATO membership could hinder its broader efforts to reduce nuclear risks globally and establish more trust-based international relationships. In conclusion, Canada aligning its actions with its disarmament values would enhance its credibility, strengthen its leadership on nuclear disarmament, and set a powerful example for other states. This alignment could create opportunities for Canada to influence disarmament efforts more effectively and regain its status as a leader on this critical issue. Leaving NATO, or at least reassessing its role within the alliance to take a more explicit stance against nuclear deterrence, would allow Canada to act consistently with its stated commitment to a nuclear-free world, strengthening its voice and influence on the global stage.
Our second argument highlights the substantial and practical benefits that NATO's collective defense provides, especially from a financial standpoint. By being a part of NATO, Canada is able to leverage the alliance's shared defense mechanisms, which means that the responsibility for national security is distributed equally across all members. And this is especially beneficial for Canada because of our country's vast geographic size, as well as our relatively small population and unique security needs, which include expansive coastlines and a close proximity to major global players. Through NATO, Canada gains a level of security that would be extremely difficult and costly to achieve independently. An important aspect of NATO's collective defense framework is Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. This mutual defense commitment provides Canada with a powerful assurance. In the face of a security threat, we would not stand alone, but rather have the unified support of 30 allied nations. This collective security guarantee serves as both a deterrent to potential aggressors and a foundation for Canada's defense strategy, which allows us to project stability without needing to dramatically increase our military spending. Although NATO encourages member states to use 2% of their GDP towards defense, it's important to note that this target is merely a guideline rather than a strict requirement. Canada has always exercised flexibility in this aspect, and it tailors its defense budget to align with its unique priorities and needs. Currently, Canada's defense expenditure stands at about 1.3% of GDP, which is well below NATO's target. However, this level of spending has proven to be sufficient to meet all of our security obligations, especially because NATO's framework allows us to rely on collective resources. Through this alliance, Canada gains access to advanced defense technologies, comprehensive intelligence sharing, and joint training exercises, all of which are assets that would be prohibitively expensive to develop independently. This pooling of resources means that Canadian forces benefit from state-of-the-art equipment, tactical expertise, and a range of collaboration, allowing them to operate at high standards without the need for excessive spending. For example, NATO's intelligence sharing networks give Canada critical insights into emerging global threats, from terrorism to cyber attacks, ensuring that our defense strategies are informed by the latest. In an era of increasingly sophisticated cyber threats and hybrid warfare, access to NATO's intelligence and technological resources is extremely valuable. In addition to this, being a member of NATO boosts Canada's reputation as a reliable partner on the global stage, reinforcing our credibility and opening up doors for future international cooperation. This credibility not only strengthens our alliances, but it also enhances Canada's influence in areas beyond defense, such as trade, environmental policy, and diplomatic efforts. The economic advantages of NATO membership are significant. If Canada were to withdraw from NATO, it would still require a strong defense, but the financial burden would likely increase sharply. Without NATO's support, Canada would need to expand its military capabilities substantially in order to ensure national security. And this would necessitate a much higher defense budget. This could lead to budget reallocations and even potentially reduce funding for essential domestic sectors, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The cost of developing an independent NATO equivalent defense system would place a considerable strain on Canada's resources, forcing trade-offs that would directly impact the quality of life of Canadian citizens. If Canada were to remain in NATO, however, this would allow Canada to maintain a balanced defense budget that meets our security needs while also preserving financial flexibility for other priorities of our nation. The current level of defense spending, bolstered by NATO's shared resources, allows Canada to address essential domestic and international issues, from climate action to Indigenous reconciliation. This strategy not only makes economic sense, but it also aligns with Canada's historical commitment to peacekeeping, diplomacy, and multilateral cooperation. Altogether, remaining a member of NATO provides Canada with an efficient, cost-effective way to secure its national defense, ensuring that we can maintain a strong, stable, and globally engaged nation without compromising our commitment to other critical priorities.
Our second argument focuses on the financial strain NATO places on Canada. As a NATO member, Canada faces increasing pressure to meet the alliance's 2% GDP defense spending target, a guideline established to ensure collective defense capabilities across the member states. However, Canada's current spending, which hovers around 1.3% of its GDP, falls short of this target. Bridging this gap would require an annual increase of billions of dollars, placing an immense financial strain on Canada's budget and potentially diverting funds from other essential programs and services. For Canada, a country that prioritizes healthcare, education, and social welfare, the pressure to increase defense spending challenges its ability to fund these areas adequately. Canada's public healthcare system alone consumes a significant portion of the national budget, requiring continuous investments to meet rising demands. Education and social services are similarly pressing priorities, with both areas in need of ongoing support to ensure accessibility and quality. Redirecting billions toward defense would likely entail significant trade-offs, reducing the budget for these critical domestic areas, which directly impact the quality of life for Canadians. In addition to healthcare and social services, Canada has urgent needs in other areas, such as infrastructure development and Indigenous reconciliation. Canada's infrastructure, particularly in rural and remote areas, requires investment to ensure safety, resilience, and economic growth. Indigenous reconciliation, a critical national priority, involves commitments that require substantial funding to improve living conditions, education, and healthcare access for Indigenous communities. Meeting NATO's defense spending threshold could strain Canada's ability to honor these commitments, undermining progress towards reconciliation and equitable development. Environmental protection is another area that could suffer under increased defense spending. Canada has committed to ambitious climate goals, aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a greener economy. This transition demands significant investment in sustainable infrastructure, clean energy, and climate adaptation strategies. Diverting funds to meet NATO's defense target could hinder Canada's ability to achieve these environmental objectives, compromising its role as a global leader in climate action, and affecting Canadians who are already feeling the impacts of climate change. Canada's geographic location further challenges the necessity of meeting NATO's defense spending requirements. Unlike many NATO members in Europe, Canada does not share borders with countries perceived as direct security threats. It is geographically insulated by 3 oceans and shares its only land border with the United States, a long-standing ally. This unique positioning reduces Canada's immediate exposure to military threats, distinguishing its defense needs from those of Eastern European NATO members who face more direct security concerns. Historically, Canada's role within NATO has been more symbolic and diplomatic than militaristic. Canada has contributed to NATO missions that align with its values, focusing on peacekeeping and diplomatic initiatives rather than a heavy military presence. This approach is consistent with Canada's reputation as a peace-oriented nation and reflects its natural interests in promoting stability and security through non-military means. Increasing defense spending to meet the NATO target could therefore be seen as misaligned with Canada's traditional security strategy and diplomatic role. Canada's social welfare model, including its public healthcare system, affordable education, and robust social safety nets, forms a core part of its national identity. These programs enhance quality of life for Canadians, reduce inequality, and contribute to social stability. Increasing defense spending at the expense of social programs would not only place these benefits at risk, but could also increase public dissatisfaction, as Canadians have consistently shown support for social welfare and public service investments. By focusing on its domestic priorities, Canada can uphold the values that define it as a nation and ensure a more resilient and equitable society for future generations. Given these considerations, Canada's current defense spending level is arguably sufficient for its specific security context. Reducing its financial commitment to NATO would enable Canada to allocate more resources to domestic priorities, while still contributing meaningfully to NATO in other ways, such as through diplomacy, intelligence sharing, and targeted peacekeeping efforts. By advocating for a flexible approach within NATO, Canada could continue supporting the alliance's goals without compromising its own national interests. In conclusion, the financial demands associated with NATO membership, specifically the push for 2% defense spending, represent a substantial burden for Canada. A more tailored approach that allows Canada to focus on domestic needs and unique security requirements would better align with its national interests, ensuring that resources are directed toward programs that directly benefit Canadians. Redefining Canada's role within NATO could strike a balance between fulfilling an alliance commitments and sustaining the values and priorities that make Canada a socially progressive and globally respected nation.
Our third argument discusses how NATO has evolved since the end of the Cold War and its ongoing relevance in addressing modern security challenges. When NATO was first founded in 1949, it was primarily a response to the threat posed by the Soviet Union, focusing on collective defense through a traditional military alliance. However, because the geopolitical landscape has changed dramatically since then, and NATO has proven itself to be a dynamic and adaptable organization capable of evolving to meet new threats that affect all member states, including Canada. These threats include not only military aggression, but also new emerging challenges like cybersecurity, global terrorism, hybrid warfare, and the implications of climate change for international security, all of which were not originally anticipated when the alliance was created. Today, NATO has transformed to address these complex challenges, becoming an essential component of global security in our rapidly changing world. For example, as Gabby mentioned, cyber attacks have emerged as a significant threat to national security, targeting critical infrastructure, financial systems, and government operations. In response, NATO established the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in 2008 and has declared cyber defense a core task. By doing this, they recognize that cyber attacks can trigger collective defense obligations under Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. Canada has played a crucial role in shaping NATO's approach to cybersecurity, advocating for stronger cyber defenses and participating in joint exercises to enhance this resilience against cyber threats. NATO has also addressed the rising threat of terrorism, which requires a very coordinated and multifaceted response beyond traditional military tactics. The alliance has expanded its focus to include counterterrorism efforts and intelligence sharing in partner countries to prevent radicalization and strengthen. Canada's involvement in these initiatives has been significant, contributing to international efforts to stabilize regions affected by terrorism and supporting NATO's broader strategy to address the root causes of this instability. Also, NATO has recognized the importance of climate change as a security threat, understanding that environmental challenges can exacerbate conflicts and displace populations, leading to new security risks that weren't before seen. The alliance has begun to integrate climate change into its new strategic planning, which includes considerations for energy security, disaster response, as well as the impact of climate-driven migration. Canada has been a vocal advocate for these changes, pushing NATO to adopt a comprehensive approach to security that includes these environmental factors. By remaining a member, Canada can continue to influence the alliance's evolving strategy, ensuring that these non-traditional threats are given the attention that they deserve. NATO's adaptability to modern threats does not detract from its original mission of collective defense, but it actually enhances it. Clearly, NATO has shown that it can balance traditional military defense with a broader and more nuanced understanding of what constitutes security in the 21st century. This balance was very evident in NATO's missions in Afghanistan, where the focus extended beyond military objectives to include things like rebuilding infrastructure, fostering local governance, and supporting economic development. These missions clearly demonstrate NATO's commitment to international stability and security. And Canada, as well, has constantly supported these efforts, recognizing the importance of contributing to a safer and more stable global environment. So, if Canada were to leave NATO, it would not only lose access to the alliance's collective resources and advanced capabilities, but also its vital intelligence sharing networks. NATO's information sharing and early warning systems are crucial in responding to global threats swiftly and effectively. This is particularly important as threats become more sophisticated and require much quicker and coordinated responses. This access to shared intelligence enables Canada to make informed decisions and anticipate potential risks, from cyber attacks to military conflicts. Withdrawal would reduce Canada's ability to access these insights, and this would diminish its capacity to respond to emerging challenges, both here domestically as well as abroad. Additionally, Canada's departure from NATO would weaken its influence on the global stage. Our participation in NATO has allowed Canada to shape international security policy, advocate for disarmament, and contribute to humanitarian missions, all while retaining the ability to act independently when needed. Canada has maintained a reputation as a middle power, capable of leveraging its position within NATO to bridge gaps between larger powers and smaller states. This diplomatic flexibility is actually enhanced, not hindered, by our NATO membership. It positions Canada as a trusted ally that can mediate disputes and offer balanced solutions to international conflicts. Also, being a part of NATO does not restrict Canada's ability to engage in peacekeeping, humanitarian efforts, and diplomatic initiatives outside of the NATO alliance. In fact, I think it strengthens our capacity to do so by providing access to NATO's logistical, operational, and financial resources. All this allows Canada to contribute meaningfully to international peace and security in a way that aligns with our values of diplomacy, stability, and peace building. Canada's participation in both NATO missions and United Nations peacekeeping operations demonstrate that these roles are complementary, not contradictory. Remaining in NATO allows us to balance our military commitments with our long-standing dedication to peacekeeping, providing a well-rounded approach to global security. Furthermore, NATO's adaptability is precisely what makes it a valuable alliance for Canada. By staying a member, Canada has the opportunity to shape NATO's evolution and ensure that its policies are aligned with Canadian values. For instance, Canada has been instrumental in advocating for a greater emphasis on human security, gender equality, and the protection of civilians in conflict zones within NATO's strategic framework. These efforts have contributed to the alliance's modernization, ensuring that it remains relevant and responsive to new challenges. In conclusion, NATO has demonstrated its capacity to evolve with the times, shifting from a Cold War-era alliance focused solely on military threats to a multifaceted organization that addresses a broad spectrum of security challenges. This evolution has been beneficial not only for global stability, but also for Canada, which has consistently played a key role in guiding NATO's transformation. By staying in NATO, Canada can continue to shape the alliance's policies and strategies to reflect our values of peace, stability, and cooperation, while benefiting from the collective security, intelligence sharing, and collaborative efforts that NATO offers.
Our third argument centers on NATO's shift in purpose since the end of the Cold War. Originally, NATO was designed as a collective defense pact against the Soviet Union. However, with the Soviet Union's collapse, NATO did not disband, but instead expanded its influence, taking on new member states. This expansion has served to entrench the power of a few member states, notably the United States, which dominates NATO both politically and financially. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO has grown from 16 members to 32, with Finland joining in 2023 and Sweden's membership pending approval. This expansion has brought NATO to Russia's borders, contributing to heightened tensions between NATO and Russia. The United States holds considerable sway within NATO, both politically and financially. As NATO's largest funder, the U.S. contributes nearly 70% of NATO's budget and exerts strong influence over the alliance's strategic decisions. The U.S.'s political dominance has shaped NATO's operations in ways that often align closely with American foreign policy interests. NATO's security strategy explicitly includes a nuclear deterrence policy, maintaining U.S. nuclear weapons in Europe and emphasizing their role as a last resort to ensure collective security. By expanding NATO's reach and solidifying the role of nuclear weapons within its defense framework, the alliance effectively upholds a system that is dependent on nuclear arms. This is fundamentally opposed to Canada's commitment to disarmament under treaties like the NPT. The presence of nuclear weapons within NATO's defense structure undermines the credibility of disarmament initiatives. NATO's reliance on nuclear deterrence as a core security element creates a double standard, where NATO members, including Canada, are expected to accept the nuclear status quo for the sake of alliance security, while advocating for global disarmament. This hypocrisy damages Canada's credibility when pushing for disarmament and weakens its ability to lead by example. The structure of NATO perpetuates an imbalance of power, with a few influential countries shaping global security policies to suit their interests. The US, as NATO's leading force, effectively shapes much of the alliance's direction, both financially and politically. Smaller NATO members, like Canada, may find their national policies and values sidelined in favor of alliance strategies that reinforce the military and economic powers of the US and other key. By remaining in NATO, Canada aligns itself with a system that prioritizes power projection and military capability over diplomatic solutions, which is inconsistent with Canada's values of peace building and disarmament. Canada's historic role as a peacekeeping nation and advocate for international diplomacy is overshadowed by NATO's security policies, which often favor force over negotiation. To conclude, NATO's post-Cold War expansion and its reinforcement of US-dominated military-industrial interests represent a shift away from the alliance's original mission of collective defense. This shift has created a system that perpetuates reliance on nuclear weapons, encourages high military spending, and serves the interests of powerful defense industries, particularly in the US, for Canada. For Canada, whose values align with peace, diplomacy, and disarmament, remaining in NATO ties it to a system that directly opposes its long-standing commitments and diminishes its credibility on the global stage as an advocate for a nuclear-free.
In counter to the opposing perspective that Canada's involvement in NATO contradicts its commitment to nuclear disarmament, as NATO's defense strategy includes nuclear weapons, we affirm that Canada's participation in NATO gives it a crucial platform to advocate for change from within. Canada has consistently promoted arms control and used its influence to push for a reduced reliance on nuclear weapons. For example, Canada has participated in discussions within NATO that aim to decrease the role of nuclear weapons in the alliance's defense plans. If Canada were to leave NATO, it would lose this influence, and the opportunity to steer NATO towards more responsible and restrained nuclear policies would diminish. Staying in NATO allows Canada to continue its efforts for disarmament while remaining engaged in key to counteract the opposing perspective that NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP places an unfair financial burden on Canada, diverting funds away from important social services like healthcare and education. We affirm that the 2% guideline is not a hard and fast rule. Canada's current spending level is sufficient for its unique security needs, and NATO does not enforce penalties for countries that fall short. In fact, being a part of NATO helps Canada save money through shared defense costs, joint training, and collective procurement. These shared expenses make Canada's defense budget more efficient. If Canada left NATO, it would need to increase its military spending to replace the support and resources it gains from being a part of the alliance, which could end up costing more in the long run. Remaining in NATO allows Canada to balance its defense needs without overspending, while still protecting funds for all domestic priorities. In counter to the opposing perspective that NATO's expansion has shifted its focus away from its original mission, favoring the interests of a few powerful countries, we affirm that the nations that joined NATO did so voluntarily, seeking the stability and security that the alliance provides. Canada's membership plays an important role in ensuring that NATO stays true to the principles of collective defense, rather than only serving the interests of a few dominant members. Canada has been a voice for smaller nations within the alliance, and has always advocated for balanced and fair policies that align with Canadian values. some of which include peace, diplomacy, and international cooperation. If Canada remains a member of NATO, it is able to continue to shape the future of the alliance. By doing so, this ensures that it can reflect Canadian values and also promote global stability. Leaving NATO could potentially mean giving up this influence, as well as the ability to guide NATO's evolution in a direction that aligns with Canadian goals. To conclude, remaining a member of NATO is absolutely crucial in order to advance Canada's interests on the global stage. Remaining a member ultimately supports Canada's commitment to peace and security, and it does so by allowing the country to promote disarmament from within a major alliance. It also is able to share defense costs effectively, and in addition to this, it can help shape NATO's policies. If Canada were to leave NATO, this would ultimately reduce the nation's voice in international security matters, as well as decrease its access to crucial resources and intelligence, and even potentially lead to an increased spending in defense. NATO is not just a military alliance. It is a partnership that holds a few values close to heart. These are diplomacy, cooperation, and the collective security of all members. By remaining a member of NATO, Canada is able to continue to be an essential player in shaping a safer world that aligns with its own values of peace, stability, and
while we respect and value the opposing perspective, we will continue to support Canada's involvement as an active member of NATO and all of the benefits.
In rebuttal to our affirmative team's argument that NATO believes in collective defense through Article 5, which states that an armed conflict attack against one or more members is considered an attack against all, we maintain the position that Canada's geographic isolation, protected by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, makes it less vulnerable to direct military threats compared to European NATO members. Furthermore, Canada could develop alternative security agreements on a bilateral basis with allies, notably the United States. The U.S.-Canada defense relationship is already robust, particularly through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which ensures close security cooperation without requiring NATO membership. This alliance offers Canada a robust defense framework without relying on NATO's broader commitments and priorities. Additionally, Canada could still maintain strong diplomatic and economic partnerships without NATO. Many neutral countries, for example Switzerland, wield considerable influence internationally through non-aligned peace-promoting roles. By withdrawing from NATO, Canada could carve out a unique role in international peace-building and conflict resolution, distinguishing itself from typical military alliances. Countries outside NATO, like Austria and Ireland, manage strong global relations and contribute to global stability through the United Nations and other international organizations rather than through military alliances. Remaining in NATO means that Canada could be obligated to support military interventions that do not align with its national interests, potentially increasing its exposure to international conflicts. A non-aligned stance could allow Canada to avoid involvement in NATO-led conflicts that might escalate tensions or attract retaliatory threats, thus reducing its vulnerability.
In counter to the affirmative team's argument that NATO membership gives Canada access to shared resources, technology, and training opportunities, we maintain that Canada could take the funds it currently contributes to NATO and invest them in its own defense industry. focusing on technologies and resources directly suited to its unique geographical and security needs. This would allow Canada to prioritize its own defense goals rather than contributing to NATO-wide projects that may not align with Canada's priorities. Canada could also enhance its defense capabilities through partnerships and advance bilateral agreements with key allies, which would be more targeted and flexible than the obligations required by NATO. Modern technology sharing and intelligent partnerships are not exclusive to NATO, as evidenced by Canada's involvement in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which includes the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Countries like Japan and South Korea, while not NATO members, have access to high levels of intelligence sharing and military cooperation with the US and other allies, ensuring they maintain advanced defense capabilities. By reallocating resources to focus on regional defense, such as Arctic security, Canada could better address its unique security needs, instead of contributing to a large, often European-focused military alliance. This would allow Canada to enhance its own defense capabilities without having to align with NATO's broader strategic goals, which may not always match Canada's priorities. A renewed emphasis on Arctic security could allow Canada to direct resources and training specifically to its needs in the north rather than following NATO-wide directives focused elsewhere. And as previously mentioned, Canada could avoid NATO's financial commitments, such as the NATO Defense Investment Pledge, which can require significant contributions. Canada currently spends billions to meet these obligations, and exiting NATO could allow it to reallocate those funds domestically. Without NATO commitments, Canada could invest selectively in technologies and defense innovations that align directly with its priorities, potentially saving costs. Canada could still maintain high training standards and military readiness through bilateral training exercises with countries like the US, and through participation in UN peacekeeping missions. NATO is not the only means of maintaining cutting-edge training, as Canada's participation in multilateral and UN operations has historically provided similar skills and knowledge. Canada's robust participation in UN peacekeeping missions such as those in Cyprus and Bosnia has demonstrated that it can maintain high levels of readiness and training without NATO-specific exercises.
Thank you so much for listening to our debate today. Let us know who you think won or which team you reside with. Given the current political climate, I want to introduce the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War Canada, the Canadian affiliate of the Nobel Peace Prize winning IPPNW in 1985. I encourage you all to attend IPPNWC's speaker series on the third Wednesday of every month. Please head to IPPNWC's website to register and subscribe to their email list to stay involved in nuclear disarmament. You can also register via Instagram, the link in their bio, and feel free to follow them to stay up to date and meet other youth involved in nuclear disarmament. See you next time on CJAM.